E aí, galera, beleza? Tabuleiros BR. Hoje não é para fazer review nem abrindo a caixa. Hoje é uma entrevista com um game designer bem famoso, todos vocês provavelmente devem conhecer. E eu fiz entrevista com o Jamey Stegmaier, né, o da Stonemaier Games, o designer do mega hit do ano passado, né, 2016, o Scythe. Jamey é o co-proprietário da Stonemaier Games e é o principal designer da empresa. Dos 4 jogos, 3 ele tem participação no design. Um é o Scythe, tá aqui atrás, um é o Scythe, outro é o Euphoria, o Viticulture e o único que ele não tem participação, que é o Between Two Cities, que está aqui atrás de mim. E nessa entrevista nós falamos sobre suas inspirações, seus jogos favoritos, os projetos futuros como designer e para a empresa Stonemaier Games e muito mais. Confira aí a entrevista. Olá, Jamey. Primeiramente, queria agradecer você por aceitar participar dessa entrevista.
Hi, Helio. My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this.
Você poderia falar um pouco sobre você? Por que decidiu se tornar um desenvolvedor de jogos de tabuleiro?
I've loved playing and designing games since I was a little kid. I think we all have some sort of innate creative passions, and board game design just happens to be mine.
Sobre o seu primeiro jogo, por que vinho e não cerveja? Tô perguntando porque é a minha bebida favorita.
I'm actually more of a beer drinker too. Wine often gives me headaches. But I think there's something romanticized and pleasant about the idea of running a vineyard, so it seemed like a good setting for a game that might appeal to gamers and non-gamers alike.
Qual a primeira coisa que vem na mente quando você pensa que algo que você criou com tanta dedicação está divertindo pessoas no mundo todo?
It truly makes me happy to hear when people find joy in playing my games. That's my goal whenever I design and publish a game, so I'm elated whenever one of my games accomplishes that goal.
Nós sempre ouvimos que primeiro vem o design do jogo e depois vem a arte. Você fez o inverso. Fez o jogo, né, da incrível arte do Jakub Rosalski. Então conte-nos sobre esse processo.
Indeed, yes. Scythe was an art-first design. I discovered a world that Jakub had started building in the summer of 2014. He had about a dozen illustrations at that point. And I instantly knew that I wanted to design a game in that world. The art actually remained a foundation of design throughout the design process. Like whenever I couldn't figure out a certain mechanism, I would look at the art to see if I could represent how I felt when I looked at the art and the feeling of that world better in the mechanisms I was working on.
Você esperava que Scythe seria esse sucesso?
When I was starting out, I knew that Scythe's art would capture people's imaginations, but I had no idea that just a few years later, Scythe would have over 100,000 copies in circulation. And that number will actually get even bigger when we do our big holiday print run that we're currently working on.
The Wind Gambit primeiro teve as regras feitas por Kai Stark. O que foi alterado nas regras originais?
Quite a bit changed. Kai had a great idea for the airships, and he had actually taken it beyond the idea stage. He wrote a rule book, he playtested it, but it still needed a lot of work. The core concepts from his original design for the airships were that the airships didn't control or occupy territories, they were free to move anywhere, and they were a new unit type, separate from workers, characters, and mechs. But aside from those core concepts and a few of like his original ideas for the airships, the different abilities they have, pretty much everything else changed.
Scythe terá outras expansões?
We are indeed working on one final expansion to Scythe. I love the world of Scythe, and I want people to enjoy playing games in that world for years to come. But I think it's best for there to be a distinct end to the expansion series of Scythe, the expansion trilogy. Kind of like how when you have a great TV show, you want it to end at the right time rather than dragging on for many years after it's kind of gone downhill and people are less interested in it.
Adoro jogar solo, mas a maioria dos jogos solos você tem que superar sua própria pontuação, jogar com vários personagens quando o jogo é cooperativo, ou superar uma pontuação pré-determinada. O modo automa em ambos, no Viticulture e Scythe, simulam uma partida com um oponente. Scythe é o meu jogo favorito solo atualmente. E fiquei realmente impressionado em como as linhas de programação automa funcionam perfeitamente. Fale um pouco sobre o processo de criação do modo automa de Scythe.
Thank you so much. I shouldn't take credit for that, for the Automa work, because Morten Monrad Peterson, my coworker and the designer of the Automa variants for our games, the solo variants, takes full credit for it. He and his team take full credit for that. Morten's goal is always to make you feel like you're playing against a human opponent without actually fully replicating all the work that would go into having a human player act on behalf of that other opponent, that AI opponent. So he specifically focuses on the interactions. Like in Viticulture, the Automa player blocks different action spaces, but the human player doesn't actually carry out those actions on behalf of the Automa player. Typically, the process works like I'll work on the multiplayer version of the game for a long time, and I'll keep Morten involved and informed throughout that process. But it isn't until that the multiplayer version of the game is almost completely done that I bring Morten in and that he starts working on the solo version of the game.
Se você fosse comparar sua primeira campanha de jogos de tabuleiro no Kickstarter com a do Scythe, qual seria a diferença entre as duas?
My first tabletop Kickstarter game was Viticulture back in August of 2012, and it raised about $65,000 from 942 backers. I ran 5 campaigns after that, 5 tabletop games, some games and some products like our realistic resource tokens. And then Scythe raised $1.8 million in November of 2015 from almost 18,000 backers. So it's a little difficult to compare the two. There's a lot of time between them, a lot of growth as a company, very different campaigns. But one odd thing that I can point out, one key difference, is that other than one day at the beginning of the Scythe campaign that was particularly stressful, it was actually much harder on my mind and body to run the Viticulture campaign, as it was just me working on it. And I didn't really know how to, I wasn't good at that point of balancing my personal needs versus the needs of the campaign. So I didn't sleep well at all during the Viticulture campaign, and it was long, it was 42 days of very little sleep. And as soon as that campaign ended, my body was like, nope, you need to take a break. And I got sick immediately, and was sick for a couple days at least. I missed days at my full-time job because I was so sick. But by the time I launched Scythe, I had Morten as a part-time employee, and we had a ton of ambassadors and fans who knew our products and our brand and Scythe. They knew Scythe really well. So they could help out, particularly when I was sleeping. So I felt very comfortable going to bed every night knowing that there were all these people who could take care of questions when I was sleeping. So I slept much better during the Scythe campaign. So in that way, Scythe was, even though it was a much bigger campaign, at least during the campaign itself, it was less stressful for me than Viticulture was.
Falamos sobre Stonemaier Games. O que mudou no processo de Viticulture para Euforia, então para Between Two Cities, Scythe e para Shadowstone? E o que mudou no processo de design também?
The number one biggest thing that has changed is our blind playtest process, which was basically non-existent during for Viticulture, before the Viticulture campaign. Although during the Viticulture Kickstarter campaign, there were some blind playtesters who joined in. Since then, we've significantly increased our focus on the blind playtest process, ranging from the 1,000 plus blind playtests for Scythe to the many intense campaign-driven blind playtest of Charterstone. So that's really the main difference in our design process, in my design process, between Viticulture and what I'm currently working on. On a company level, though, we're pretty similar to how we started out. I had a full-time job when we started, when I ran the Viticulture campaign, and now this is my full-time job. But at the time, I was still doing full-time hours on Viticulture and on Stonemaier Games. So I am still our only full-time employee. Alan, my co-founder, back then he works about 5 hours a week on Stonemaier stuff. And then we have Morton, who is a part-time employee. That's really the main difference as a company.
Qual foi sua filosofia de design nesses jogos?
I have a number of principles that I try to follow in my games, but I would say the one overarching philosophy is a focus on flow. I want my games to flow really well so that players are fully immersed in the experience, almost to the point that they forget that they're playing a game and they're in that moment, in that world. So that's why player turns in my games are really short and simple, and as much as possible, I try to avoid artificial constructs like rounds and phases, just so that each turn flows naturally into the next, and so on around the table.
Você acha que continuará a publicar jogos fora dos seus próprios projetos?
Absolutely, yeah. That's a big part of what we're moving forward into. Although I will continue to design games as well. Currently, we have 2 to 3 games in development and serious consideration for publication right now, and they're all by outside designers.
Recentemente eu fui ver as notícias na página da expansão do Indie Games e foi adicionada a foto de um gato com a caixa do jogo. Ele é o Biri ou o Walter?
I think I actually posted 2 photos of the Win Gambit box, and so one of my cats was in each of those photos. They look pretty similar though. Biddy is a short-haired orange tabby cat, and Walter is a long-haired orange tabby cat. So they're pretty similar, but I think they were in both of those photos.
A expansão do Euphoria está sendo feita. O que você pode falar sobre a expansão e especificamente sobre o modo solo?
Yeah, Morton is the lead designer on the Euphoria expansion, but I keep interrupting his work to have him work on Automa variants, the solo variants for our other games. I think he'll return to it in September, and the last version I saw of it was very close to being done, other than all the artwork and graphic design. So the game design portion of it was almost done. Euphoria's evolution is all about the story. So this expansion is about what happens to the various dystopias after they're fully constructed. They end up forming a more cohesive whole, and then there's a schism between those who follow the leader of all those dystopias and those who reject her ideologies. The expansion includes a new board that replaces the original board, as well as some new components and mechanisms that are specifically tied to that board. And as usual, Morton is waiting for the multiplayer design to be complete before he really launches into the Automa design and playtest process.
Qual jogo Legacy é o seu favorito?
It's tough to pick my favorite Legacy games because I admire all of them for different reasons, even though there actually aren't all that many right now. But Risk Legacy does stand out as one of my happiest and most positive experiences with the Legacy game, and most memorable really, just because it was so novel and new. I called it my favorite gaming experience of 2013. I think that's when I played it, maybe 2014, just because it had such a big impression on me, and a big impact on me as a designer and as a gamer.
O que torna o Charterstone diferente de outros jogos Legacy?
So different stuff about Charterstone. The core mechanism itself is pretty unique as compared to other games because each player is constructing permanent buildings in their portion of the village, and those buildings become worker placement action spots for other players and you to use. So that in itself, that's been seen in other games, but not with a level of permanence and not in other Legacy games. Beyond that, Charterstone plays 1 to 6 players, so it's the first Legacy game to really feature that range of players. It has a branching story and decision tree that goes well beyond the more linear campaign story. So it has a linear campaign story, even though there are branching paths. But each player has their own unique decision tree as well, that I think is very different than other legacy games. It's fully replayable after the 12-game legacy campaign, so that's unique. Most legacy games they might be playable, but they're not really designed to be played after you're done the campaign. Charterstone is designed specifically so that you can continue to play the game after you finish the campaign. But it also has a different feature, a new feature, where if you want to play a second 12-game campaign, you can flip the board over to the backside, because it's the same on both sides, and you can buy a recharge pack that includes all of the components that were permanently altered in the first campaign, and you can add it in and play a second campaign all the way through. And also, just a component thing, and it includes 36 really nice metal coins in every copy of the game. So you don't have to add on metal coins or buy a deluxe version. It's standard in every copy of the game.
Charterstone é o primeiro Legacy com modo solo. Pandemic você pode jogar com mais de um personagem, mas provavelmente a experiência não será tão divertida quanto se você estivesse jogando com alguns amigos. Como funciona o modo solo de Charterstone?
So even if you don't play Charterstone solo, the game still has some automated elements. It's basically one quick little thing you do at the beginning of the game to ensure that the inactive charters in the game continue to grow just as the active human-controlled charters are. But if you're playing by yourself, or if you want some of the inactive charters to feel more alive, there's a simple set of Automa rules and cards to simulate human players, as if human players were running those other charters. A very basic explanation of how this works, and there's a rule book on our website if you want to see. But when it's an Automa player's turn, you draw a card for them, you move one of their workers to the action space on that card, and you usually do something extra, like you give them some victory points, or you remove and discard a card from the advancement mat to kind of simulate like if another player had taken that card or if another player had gotten points, things like that. So going back to what I said about the Automas look at player interactions, that's the focus of the Automa in Charterstone.
O que você pode dizer que ainda não foi dito sobre o The Wind Gambit e Charterstone?
So I'm not sure if there really are any secrets about the Wind Gambit. By the time this video comes out, I'll have released the full rules, so everything's out there that I can think of. I'm sure I'll think of some insight from the game design process from the Wind Gambit that I haven't mentioned, but I can't think of anything offhand. Charterstone is almost the exact opposite, because even though I've shown the rulebook for Charterstone, I've talked about design diary stuff on our website and on Facebook. It's almost all spoilers, so I haven't revealed pretty much of the things that are going to happen in Charterstone. One random thing I'll mention is one of the influences of the game. When I was designing Charterstone in the summer of 2016, I was in the middle of the design process then. I happened to be watching the show Deadwood on HBO. I was watching the DVDs for it. I don't know if you all have seen Deadwood, but it's billed as kind of a Western show, but really it's a show about the start and growth of a town. And so watching Deadwood had a pretty big influence on the design process of Charterstone. That's something I haven't shared yet.
Quais são os próximos desafios para você como designer e para a Stonemaier Games após The Wind Gambit e Charterstone?
So as a designer, I'm working on a cooperative game, or a couple cooperative games really, which is a new challenge for me because so far I've only designed competitive games. As for Stonemaier Games, the next immediate challenge will be for me to sort out all the pre-orders that we have from distributors for our big holiday print run. I don't know if people realize this, but game publishers, like when we're thinking ahead about what we want to have in stock to sell in November and December, we have to start production for those things as early as May or June. So I've been going through that process. We started production in May and June, and we're getting kind of close to the point where we're going to start shipping some of that stuff out of China. So I have to make sure that we have that we send the right stuff to all the distributors and all of our international partners. So it's quite a bit of logistics to handle, but fortunately, for the most part, I really enjoy working with spreadsheets.
Qual o seu atual top 10 jogos de tabuleiro?
The last time I did a top 10 list was in February of this year. I won't go into all the games on that list, but I'll name the top 3. My number 1 right now is Castles of Mad King Ludwig. My number 2 is Isle of Skye, which I know you all have in Brazil. And my number 3 is Time Stories. I don't know if you have that in Brazil, but it's a fantastic game.
Para quem estiver curioso do top 10 completo, essa é a lista completa do top 10 do Jamey Stegmaier. Quais são os seus designers favoritos de jogos de tabuleiro?
There are so many designers that I respect and appreciate and that I've learned from, and there are game designers that I've really enjoyed working with. I had the pleasure of working with Uwe Rosenberg, with Ben Rossett and Matthew O'Malley on Between Two Cities, on some other designers that we're working with but I haven't announced yet. As well as Kai Stark. I enjoyed working with Kai on the Wind Gambit. But a few, like if I had to name like a top 3 designers whose games I get really excited about and I want to see more from, and that I get kind of fanboyish if I talk to them, are Alexander Pfister, Rob Dabbio, and kind of as I mentioned before, Uwe Rosenberg.
Você tem algum jogo favorito da Stonemaier Games?
I am going to say Between Two Cities. It's the only game we've published that I haven't designed, and so it was just a special game for me because it showed kind of a growth and an evolution of Stonemaier Games, and I really like working with Ben and Matthew, so I think they did a fantastic job on that game, and the recent expansion Capitals really takes it to a new level. I really enjoy Capitals.
Você sempre diz que os designers devem encontrar diversão em seus jogos. Se você tivesse que dar um conselho aos aspirantes a designers, qual seria esse conselho?
So the thing I would say about trying to find the fun in games and trying to improve my skills as a designer, and other designers might do the same, is to just play a lot of games, especially games that aren't in your wheelhouse. So if you're typically a Euro gamer and maybe you design Euro games, take time to play games that aren't Euro games. Take time to play Ameritrash games and social and party games and bluffing games and abstract games. There's just, I think there's a lot that you can learn and that I've learned from finding the fun in those games, and they often end up having a very positive impact on my game designs, even if my game designs are much more Euro-ish. Euro game-like.
Para concluir, vamos fazer bate-bola, pergunta-resposta. Uma mecânica de jogos de tabuleiro.
A modern board game mechanism, I'll say drafting.
Uma euforia.
Euphoria. Chocolate makes me feel euphoric.
Vinho.
I'll mention Pinot Noir as a wine.
Uma cerveja.
A random beer that I doubt many people have heard of is called Ebisu. It's a Japanese beer that I really loved drinking when I spent time in Japan many years ago.
Modo solo.
I actually don't play many solo games, but I love... Actually, I don't play solo games at all on the tabletop, but I do like playing board game ports on my iPad, and so one of my favorites is Lords of Waterdeep. So I technically play that solo against the AI on the app.
Bom jogo.
A good game is Yedo. I don't know if you've played Yedo, but it's a game I really enjoy. And that I think of it as a good game because it's never made my top 10 list, but I always really enjoy it when it gets to the table.
Jogo ruim.
A bad game, I'll name one of my own, a game called Medieval Quest that I designed when I was like 8 years old. And I was really proud of it at the time, but I am sure it was terrible.
O melhor jogo?
The best game, my favorite game right now is the Castles of Mad King Ludwig. So I'll call that the best game for me right now.
Obrigado mais uma vez, Jamey. Qual a sua mensagem para os board gamers brasileiros?
Yeah, thank you so much to all of the Brazilian board gamers who have played our games and found a way to get our games. And also thank you to Fire on Board Jogos, who published Scythe for us, and to Ludofy for publishing Charterstone. I'm really looking forward to working with Ludofy in the future and bringing more of our games to gamers down in Brazil. I really look forward to hearing also what you think about Charterstone when it's released later this year in Brazilian Portuguese. Thank you.
Valeu a quem assistiu. Espero que vocês tenham gostado. E até os próximos vídeos.